On tonight's summary of the Israel-Hamas War, day 174. As hostage negotiations continue to be frozen, Israel's war cabinet is reportedly split on the ways to move forward. The IDF announced today that Thabet, a high-profile Hamas figure in charge of manpower and logistical supplies for the entire Hamas movement, was killed today in al-Shifa hospital. The IDF reportedly carried out a series of attacks in Syria, targeting pro-Iranian militias and carrying out an attack in the Haleb International Airport. ISIS calls upon Muslims to march on Palestine and fight the Jews face-to-face. The new Palestinian government received official approval and will be sworn in on Sunday. Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad have yet to agree to this new formation, which is supposed to also include the Gaza Strip. The International Court of Justice issues new injunctions to Israel, calling on the country to cooperate with UN aid agencies and to open more land crossings to ensure the entrance of aid into the Gaza Strip. Hello everyone, I'm Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here to bring you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War. It is currently the evening of March 28, 2024 in the United States, the morning of March 29, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, the Israeli delegation has returned to Israel and the negotiations are officially frozen. Currently, the negotiating parties, i.e. Qatar, Egypt, and the United States, are trying to come up with a new formula to bring the parties back to the negotiating table. Meanwhile, it is reported that in Israel, the political establishment is debating about the next move. Hamas's rejection terms leave the situation in a stalemate right now, and in Israel's war cabinet there are reportedly opposing positions. Minister Eisenkot backed the position of the negotiating team, that includes the head of the Mossad, Dedi Barnea, and the IDF general, Nitzan Alon, who want Israel to expand its negotiating parameters and be more flexible about Gazans returning to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, in order to somehow allow negotiations to continue to the next level. There are reports that Minister Gantz and Minister Ron Dermer also tended to side with this. In turn, Prime Minister Netanyahu has stated that the only increased military pressure will bring Hamas back to the negotiating table with a different answer. The IDF Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi, reportedly supported that it is possible to apply this extra pressure. There was supposed to be a meeting of the war cabinet tonight in order to discuss the situation. However, Prime Minister Netanyahu reportedly canceled the meeting minutes before it was supposed to convene, instead convening the expanded cabinet of the government, in which there's a lot more support for the position to not allow more flexibility in negotiations and instead apply more military pressure. Meanwhile, there are reports that the currently far lower level negotiations, this is still the skeletal teams that remain on site in Doha, are going to continue their negotiations in Cairo next week. Again, the different negotiating parties are trying to come up with a formula, hoping to reach a breakthrough. Moving on to the Gaza Strip, there were no rockets or mortars that were reported fired from the Gaza Strip towards Israel in the last 24 hours. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, gun battles and fighting were reported in the Tel el-Halawa region, this is in Gaza City. Al-Qassam brigades reported targeting 2 IDF tanks with Yasin 105 missiles, reporting that at least one of them was hit with these missiles. In addition to this, the IDF operation in al-Shifa hospital continues. This is now over a week. Gun battles are still being reported in the area. The IDF reported today that over 200 terror operatives have been killed in the compound. The Al-Quds brigades of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad reported firing mortars at IDF soldiers in the region of al-Shifa hospital as well. In some cases, it was also reported that attackers emerged from the emergency ward in the hospital and gun battles occurred in the area. In addition, the IDF announced today that Thabet, who is the head of manpower in the al-Qassam brigades, was killed in the al-Shifa operation. Thabet is considered among the quote-unquote top 10 in Hamas's Gaza leadership and was known to be one of the important resources in that connected the movement's top leadership whenever they came up with a new plan of operation and translated this into actual operations on the ground. According to the IDF, he was killed while trying to escape with 2 more terror operatives within the hospital compound from one area to the other. The IDF put out this announcement and again stated that there are still more high-profile figures within al-Shifa hospital that the IDF is trying to hunt down in this operation. In the central parts of the Gaza Strip, the IDF detonated one of the longest tunnels that were located in the Gaza Strip thus far. This tunnel crossed from the northern parts of the Gaza Strip to the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. It was reportedly over 2.5 kilometers long and was detonated with over 30 tons of explosives. In addition, in the central parts of the Gaza Strip, a substantial bombing was reported in the El Maghazi refugee camp. 6 people were reported killed in this bombing. The IDF did not put out a statement about what that bombing was targeting. In the southern parts of the Gaza Strip in Han Yunis, the operation that the IDF is carrying out in the al-Amal neighborhood in the western part of the city continues, with the IDF combing through the neighborhood, going house by house and alley by alley, as it has done in various other parts of Han Yunis, as well as in northern parts of the Gaza Strip, searching for both Hamas operatives as well as for weapons and tunnels. Intensive gun battles were reported in the area, and dozens of operatives were reportedly arrested. A weapons cache was discovered near the Al-Amal hospital, including dozens of grenades, guns, and military gear. In addition to this, ongoing battles are being reported in the El-Karara region. This is in the eastern parts of Han Yunis. The IDF reported deepening its hold in the neighborhood, while al-Qassam brigades in turn reported successfully hitting an IDF tank and an IDF D9 bulldozer with Yasin 105 missiles. In addition, al-Qassam also stated that in Han Yunis, not reported that this is in al-Karara, al-Amal, or a different part, the group successfully detonated a booby-trapped house with IDF soldiers inside, causing injuries that they noted were evacuated by helicopter. In addition, in the southern town of Rafah, a substantial bombing was reported in the northern parts of the city, targeting a house. 12 people were reportedly killed in this bombing. Again, the IDF did not put out any statement about what this bombing specifically was targeting. In the last several days, by now probably over a week, there have been repeated bombings in Rafah that have been reported almost every night. Yesterday, Al-Ahbar reported that in anticipation of an invasion of Rafah, the IDF may start carrying out more and more intensive operations in Rafah to quote-unquote pave the way. It is possible these bombings are part of that. Unclear right now. It has not been reported what that bombing was targeting. Other news related to the Gaza Strip. As expected, despite the repeated denials, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu informed the War Cabinet today that an Israeli delegation is going to travel to the United States next week to discuss the Rafah invasion. I remind everyone that after the United States abstained in the UN Security Council resolution that called for a ceasefire, Prime Minister Netanyahu canceled this delegation hours before it was due to take off. Now that delegation is again going to go next week. Despite the repeated rhetoric that the plans are already ready for the Rafah invasion and that the IDF is going to invade Rafah regardless of what happens, it is becoming very apparent that it is highly unlikely that Israel will carry out a full-scale invasion of Rafah, while the United States explicitly states that this is a mistake, that this is unnecessary, and that the United States is against such an invasion. All those words have been used by different U.S. officials in the last week. This delegation is now going to travel to Rafah, hoping to convince the United States about the plans that Israel has in place in order to safely evacuate civilians from Rafah and carry out this invasion. Will they succeed or not, and how that will impact the continuation of the war remains to be seen. Other news related to the Gaza Strip. A movie has been circulating on social media in which IDF soldiers narrate the detonation of a structure in the Gaza Strip and quote-unquote dedicate it to Nissim Kahlon, an IDF soldier who was killed in the Gaza Strip yesterday. In the movie, the speakers express their love for Kahlon and their respects to his family. Then a military countdown is done and the detonation occurred. It was not reported where this detonation happened. However, since Kahlon and his unit were operating in the Al-Amal region of Han Yunis, it is very likely that that is where it occurred. I only bring this in because the IDF has recently expressed concern and began expanding its international law unit, expecting that movies such as these and other movies showing soldiers carrying out quote-unquote retribution are going to be used eventually for international lawsuits against both Israel and individual soldiers in the years to come. The IDF has put out repeated calls to its soldiers to stop taking such videos. However, that apparently has not taken hold in many units. Regarding casualties, no IDF soldiers reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. This leaves the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began on 253. 3 IDF soldiers reported injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. This brings the total number of IDF soldiers injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 1,523. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting that 62 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. This brings the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 32,552. 74,980 Palestinians reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. Aid paradropping missions were carried out today throughout the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. This aid included 2 planes from Jordan and 1 plane respectively from Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Germany. In the last several days, it has been reported that each one of these packages usually weighs about 1 ton and carries within it different food preservatives and sometimes more humanitarian aid. Other news related to the humanitarian situation. Israeli protesters tried to block the Kerem Shalom crossing today as well. Some of them lit bonfires in the area. The police reportedly evacuated them. 3 people refused to evacuate and they were arrested. Other news, France has officially restored the country's funding to UNRWA. This funding was suspended alongside when most countries suspended their funding to UNRWA several months ago after the IDF said that UNRWA workers participated in the October 7th attack. Since then, some countries have been gradually restoring their funding to the organization. This includes Australia, the EU, Canada, among others. In the United States, in turn, Congress recently approved a motion to continue the suspension of UNRWA funding until 2025. Moving on to the West Bank, there was a Palestinian attack that was carried out in the Jordan Valley today. A shooting attack occurred when Abu Rida al-Saadi, a Palestinian from Jenin, reportedly opened fire at cars passing by on Road 90, including targeting a school bus. The attacker is reportedly a security officer in the Palestinian Authority forces in Jenin. 3 people were injured in this attack, and the attacker escaped. The IDF is reportedly operating in the Aja village in that area in pursuit of the attacker. In addition to this, IDF activity was also reported throughout the West Bank in the areas of Hebron, Ramallah, Tulkarem, Jenin, Salfit, and the areas adjacent to East Jerusalem. The IDF reported that 18 Palestinians were arrested throughout the West Bank in the last 24 hours. The Palestinian Prisoner Society in turn reported that 25 Palestinians were arrested throughout the last 24 hours, and as I often state, the differences between those two reports sometimes come from differences between Palestinians who are arrested versus those who are detained. Sometimes it is simply contradictory reporting. Sometimes it is because the Palestinian Prisoner Society includes East Jerusalem in its definition of the West Bank, whereas the IDF does not. Either way, those are the two reports of the two organizations. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon, there were continued escalations of rocket barrages that were fired from Lebanon, targeting the northern parts of Israel today. Surprisingly, this is one of the first days since the war began where there was no IDF bombings that the IDF reported were carried out in Lebanon. Regarding the fire from Hezbollah, there were repeated barrages of rockets throughout the day, targeting primarily the western Galilee. These targeted the areas of Alon, Goranot Galil, Hanita, Goren, there was a direct hit in a house there, and Shlomi, there was also a direct hit in the house. In addition, rockets were also fired towards the areas of Rosh Nikra, Liman, and Batzat in different barrages. In addition to all this, a quote-unquote aerial target, which usually refers to some type of drone, was intercepted above the area of Tzfat. Substantial explosions were heard in the area. These are pictures from the interception that were taken by different people on the ground. In addition to this, fires also broke out in the Beria forest. This is in the areas of the Upper Galilee due to rocket fragments that hit the area. As I stated, there was surprisingly no IDF bombings that were reported throughout southern Lebanon in the last 24 hours. Al-Manar did report artillery fire in the areas of El-Wazani. Al-Miyad reported that there were also artillery fire towards the areas of Tir Kherfa. The IDF did report that it responded with artillery fire towards the different launching sites. However, again, no bombings were reported. Other news related to this front. The Nada al-Watan newspaper, which is a newspaper that opposes Hezbollah in Lebanon, quoted diplomatic sources in Lebanon today stating that escalations are imminent in the fighting between the countries, since, according to these diplomats, all information points to the fact that Netanyahu's government is adamant on expanding the war against Lebanon and has no red lines. This comes amidst the repeated attacks that the IDF has carried out deeper and deeper into northern Lebanon in the past days. Different IDF officers were also quoted as saying that the IDF has now included northern Lebanon within the parameters of carrying out attacks against Hezbollah. However, again, there were no reports of attacks that were carried out today, so it remains to be seen what the trajectory of these escalations are. In addition to all this, though, there were a series of attacks that were reported in Syria throughout the day that were attributed to the IDF. Among others, the Syrian Human Rights Observatory reported that the IDF carried out an attack on the outskirts of Damascus. The NGO stated that the targets were farm areas belonging to Hezbollah and pro-Iranian militias, adding that 5 people were injured and some may have been killed. In turn, the Syrian Ministry of Defense stated that that attack targeted a residence in the area and that 2 people were injured. In addition to this, Al-Miyan reported an IDF attack that was carried out in the Asaida Zainab region. This is the areas south of Damascus. According to the report, no injuries occurred, but substantial damage was done to infrastructure in the area. These are some of the pictures that the news network disseminated. It was not reported what was specifically targeted, why this infrastructure was attacked. In addition to this, later in the night, Al-Miyan again reported an IDF attack in the area of Haleb, specifically in the areas of Anirab and Asapira. These are in the areas of the northwestern section of Syria. Shortly after that, the opposition Voice of the Capital radio station stated that the attack targeted the international airport in Haleb, and Al-Hadith added that 3 explosions were heard in the area. Later, some reports stated that what was attacked were pro-Iranian militia sites. However, when I was reading those reports, I could not confirm if they were referring to this attack or to the previous attacks that occurred around Damascus. So right now, all I am stating is that an attack occurred in the area of the Haleb airport. When I find out more information about this, I'll report more about it, probably in tomorrow's summary. Moving on to some of the regional developments. After a few days ago, the Houthis stated that they carried out attacks against the United States and United Kingdom ships and sent missiles towards Eilat. The Houthi leader, Abdelmalik Badr ad-Din al-Houthi, stated in a speech today that throughout the last week, the organization has carried out over 10 operations using 37 nautical missiles and drones and targeting 9 ships. He added that since the war began, 86 ships that are associated with Israel, the United States, and the United Kingdom have been attacked, again also stating that attacks were carried out against Eilat, that is the most southern town in Israel, in the last week. In addition to this, the U.S. Central Command reported that for the second day in a row, the Houthis launched 4 drones that were threatening ships in the Red Sea, and that the 4 were intercepted. Moving on to some of the political and general trends for the last 24 hours, there is internal political drama in Israel that is coming to a boiling point, and while it is internal into Israeli politics, it may actually precipitate the government falling and going to new elections, which will clearly drastically change the course of the war. The issue, which I've mentioned in several different summaries the last week, revolves around the exemption from military service that ultra-Orthodox Jews have in Israel. The current extension to the law that allows these extensions expires on April 1st, and currently there is a big divide in Israel's government between, on the one side, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and Minister Gantz, both of whom side with the IDF's need for more soldiers and say that these exemptions cannot be allowed to continue, and on the other side, the ultra-Orthodox parties that are part of Netanyahu's government, who are threatening to leave the government if more extensions are not granted. Trying to reconcile these, Prime Minister Netanyahu asked the Israeli High Court of Justice for more postponements today, but the judges refused, and as of now, on April 1st, the extended regulations are going to expire. It remains to be seen what's going to happen. Historically in Israel, a large amount of governments have fallen, specifically around this issue, and unless skillful political maneuvering is done in the coming days, we may see the situation spiral into elections. I will say even if that does happen, the law in Israel requires that elections will be only in 3 months from when the government falls. However, it will have a substantial impact from the moment that happens on the way the war is run. In addition to this, amidst diplomatic crises between Israel and the United States, General Charles Brown, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the United States, stated today that the U.S. did not agree to supply Israel with all of the weaponry the country had requested, some because it was not possible to supply, and some because, quoting, "we are not willing to supply it, at least not right now." According to other reports, in Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant's meetings with some of the U.S. officials, it was implied that if Israel does not comply with the United States' demands regarding the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, the U.S. is going to have difficulty in approving the $14 billion of aid that Congress is due to vote on as part of an aid package for Israel in the war. Other political news from the last 24 hours. The leader of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Ziad Nahaleh, met with Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei in Tehran. This meeting comes after a few days ago Hamas's external leader Ismail Haniyeh also met with the supreme leader and also met with other Iranian officials in the Iranian leadership. Nahaleh stated after the meeting that, quote, "the people of Gaza and the resistance forces are adamant on standing their ground until final victory, and by God's grace, final victory will be realized in the not-so-distant future." Other news, ISIS put out a statement today. After praising the attack that the group carried out in Russia, killing 143 people, the spokesperson encouraged supporters to launch attacks against Israel, stating, "We pray to Allah that you will reach Palestine and fight the Jews face-to-face in a holy war of jihad." His wording does somewhat resemble the call that Hamas put out yesterday, where al-Qassam leader Muhammad Def calls upon Muslims to make their way to Palestine and carry out a holy war. Nonetheless, it is important to note that despite this similarity, ISIS did not reference Hamas's message. More broadly, historically, the two movements have actually been more rivals than allies and specifically have fought each other in the Gaza Strip due to their interpretations of jihad and what that means. However, those statements were fairly similar. Other political news, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, published its response today to the injunction requests that South Africa put in light of the worsening conditions in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. In addition to reaffirming the previous injunctions, the court instructs Israel to fully cooperate with the United Nations to, quote, "allow the unhindered provision at scale of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance, including food, water, electricity, fuel, shelter, clothing, hygiene, and sanitation requirements, as well as medical supplies and medical care to Palestinians throughout Gaza." It also adds, continuing to quote, This includes increasing the capacity and number of land crossings and land crossing points and maintaining them open for as long as necessary," end quote. The court also instructed Israel to report to the court within 1 month about how it is implementing these injunctions. Included in the injunctions is also a call for an unconditional release of all hostages in the Gaza Strip. So that injunction is fairly important, while the initial injunctions that the ICJ imposed upon Israel said that it has to allow as much humanitarian aid to come in as necessary. This time it explicitly says opening more land crossings to allow humanitarian aid to enter the Gaza Strip. Israel is required to report to the court within a month. How it is abiding by this remains to be seen what it will actually happen. In addition to this, Ireland announced today that the country is going to ask to join South Africa's case in the ICJ, and intends on asking the court to expand the definition of genocide to include systematic denial of humanitarian aid within the definition of genocide. Moving on to the future of the Gaza Strip, Politico reported today that the Biden administration is exploring several different stabilizing options for the day after in the Gaza Strip. Among these is a Pentagon proposal to assist in funding of a multinational force or a Palestinian peacekeeping force to govern and take control of the Gaza Strip. It was not reported if this is being officially discussed with Israel or not. However, this does come days after Israel's Defense Minister Gallant has been meeting with senior U.S. officials. Among others, it was reported that they are discussing day-after scenarios. Gallant is a minority in Israel's government who is in favor of developing local Palestinian leadership that will have some sort of relationship with the West Bank. This is vehemently opposed by the Israeli government. However, the fact that days after Gallant's meetings, it is being reported the United States is considering developing some sort of local Palestinian peacekeeping force is likely associated with those meetings. Other news related to the future of the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Authority chairman Mahmoud Abbas officially approved the proposed plans of Mohammed Mustafa, the intended Palestinian prime minister, for the establishment of a new Palestinian government. With this, the government is going to be sworn in on Sunday and will reportedly include a series of technocratic ministers in different positions. Among the government's agenda is strengthening the rule of law and the justice system and fighting corruption, as well as deep institutional reform that includes reorganization and unification of the different ministries in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So this is part of the vision of the Palestinian Authority to regain control of the Gaza Strip. This is also part of what the U.S. administration is demanding of the Palestinian Authority in order to be given authority in the Gaza Strip. It is important to note that despite the reconciliation talks, neither Hamas nor the Palestinian Islamic Jihad have expressed support or even agreement for the formation of this new government, so it remains to be seen what kind of authority and rule it can actually have or even influence in the Gaza Strip. Other news, the Saudi Asharaq News Network reported today that in the meeting between the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Arab foreign ministers that occurred on March 21st, Blinken was presented with a document that includes detailed plans for a process of ending the war and establishing a Palestinian state. The report adds that the delegates, which included the foreign ministers of Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Jordan, and the General Secretary of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, stated to Blinken that the document develops detailed plans for the establishment of a state within 3 years, and they asked Blinken to review the document and return the United States' answer as soon as possible. We may see the United States saying anything about this in the coming days. It is also possible that this is already part of the United States' plans. It's also possible the United States is developing different plans. Remains to be seen. If you find these reports important, please do remember to hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications if you want to know when reports come out. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.